he's not like supernatural with it.
Right.
So it might be something where he laughs and then says that's funny and then kind of stammers a little bit and ends up saying something kind of like dorky and endearing because that's sort of what he does. But yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting one. He hasn't been tossed questions like that too often this year.
We talked on Friday on this show, and I'm sure many other shows did too, that the Niners just completed the toughest 3-game stretch in history. Then they host the lowly Atlanta Falcons, and you think maybe Kyle, that means a little bit more of Kyle than some other teams and sending a message, whatever you might want to say. I don't think we were the only ones, Chris, to talk about this being a trap game, and I don't just mean other radio stations, and I don't mean other writers. I'm pretty darn sure that Kyle and his coaches talked about that much of the week, instilled that in the team. I don't think that was a surprise to them. They knew this had the potential to be a trap game, and guess what? They got trapped. So what was it? What did they disrespect the opponent? Was it injuries? Was it a combination of that and other things? You tell me.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of a lot of stuff. George Kittle after the game said offensively they didn't play with very much intensity, which I think is human nature. Given what happened the previous weekend against the Saints and, like you mentioned, that 3-game gauntlet that they just went through. Obviously, injuries in the secondary were important. I mean, you missed, the league's best passing defense without 60% of its secondary with Jaquasi Tart and Richard Sherman and K'Wan Williams going up against, arguably the best receiver in the league in Julio Jones. That's going to be a problem. But the game was still there to be won. If George Kittle doesn't fumble that ball out of bounds inside the 2-minute warning there on 3rd down, the 49ers probably get a first down there and milk at least another minute off the clock, forcing the Falcons to burn their 2 timeouts, and then they probably don't have enough time to go back and win the game the other way, or the 49ers could have scored a touchdown there. The Falcons also had a good game plan. Kyle Juszczyk said after the game that the Falcons switched up their defensive fronts, and they had 5 guys down for the first time really that they've seen all season. So that was something that they had to adjust to on the fly without their starting center, Weston Richburg. So that might have contributed to the offensive line not playing particularly well. I think it was a combination of everything. I mean, the injuries, the mistakes, Matt Breida's fumble, George Kittle's fumble out of bounds. That I thought I wrote about that in my game story. I thought that was a really big play in the game, and it was an odd sort of. It sort of exemplified the day in the sense that there were mixed emotions because the 49ers, clinched a playoff spot, and George Kittle became the all-time leader in receiving yards for a tight end earlier in the game. Passing Mike Ditka's record, which is a pretty big deal, obviously, but. He ends up having a mistake that could have ultimately cost the 49ers the game. And it didn't come down just to that one play, but defensively they just weren't the same defense without Sherman, Tart, and Williams, and I think that's to be expected. And Dee Ford not being in the game. I know he hasn't played a ton, but he has been an effective pass rusher when he's in there. The 49ers are pretty thin now along the defensive line, particularly at defensive end. So I think it was just a culmination of a lot of things. I don't think there's one thing you can really pinpoint, and these things happen. Good teams lose. That's what happens. The best teams go 13-3, 14-2. They end up losing 2 or 3 times, and so that's where the 49ers are at right now.
Chris Biderman joins us from the Sacramento Bee. You're not a doctor, and I know it's Monday, but do you anticipate any relief coming for the Niners from the injury side against the Rams?
Well, Richard Sherman said that, and this was sort of an ominous sign, I think, actually, from last week. He said, if we had to have this game, I would be playing. He said that about the Falcons game, sure. And so it sort of, I don't know if it ultimately mattered, but I thought it was sort of telling as to the 49ers' approach, knowing that they could potentially, having a 1-game lead over the Seahawks going into that game, meant that they could drop 1 to the Falcons and then win their next 2 and still get the number 1 seed or at least win the division and get a first-round bye. But no, Sherman's probably going to be back. Dee Ford, I don't know if he's going to be healthy. And we haven't, K'Wan Williams is going through the concussion issue, so we don't really know. It's basically impossible to project what that's going to be like, but he's been a really good player, their slot cornerback. And obviously you missed him yesterday. So I guess you could probably feel optimistic that you're going to get Williams back. We don't know how bad that concussion was, but Sherman's probably going to be back in all likelihood. And Jaquasi Tart, the rib fracture injury, it's more about pain management than I guess his actual mobility, but it looked like he was in significant pain when he was going through some rehab stuff on the side field during practice last week. So we'll have to see with that. But I don't think Marcel Harris was terrible yesterday. Tart's replacement. I thought the bigger issue was not having Sherman and K'Wan Williams at corner.
Chris Biderman with us. There's a thought too. I know the math is out there, but they've got the Rams. I don't want to say the Rams game is meaningless. It's not. But as I understand it, the Niners could have lost to the Falcons, lose to the Rams. Seattle could win both, and they still control their own destiny in Seattle. Do you think at any point, if there is a 50-50 decision maybe with Richard, the coaching staff looks at it and says, we're not going to use these games as buys here, but we'd rather take our chances against the Rams and not play some of these guys half-assed or half-injured and save them up for Seattle? Or do you think it's, what's to the wall regardless against the Rams if you can play your plan?
Well, I think if the Niners and Seahawks have the same record right now, right? So
yes.
I was just thinking through this. It's early on a Monday. If the Niners lose and the Seahawks win, then the Niners would the Niners would be a game down,
right.
And then they would have to go. Okay, so I guess maybe you're right.
Because they win those tiebreakers. They win the tiebreakers,
Chris. I hadn't thought
Chris.
about that yet.
Yeah. Right.
You'll have to forgive me. It's early
No,
morning.
it's fine. That was my point, though. They win the tiebreakers regardless with Seattle if they win that game. And I think it goes down to like the fifth tiebreaker. It's really weird. They have similar records in the first few. So, yeah, I wonder if that's the case. I know the coaching staff, they're more awake than you and me. They got it. They know what's going on. You wonder at some point if they play fast and loose with that and effectively give these guys a bye.
Yeah, they're definitely more conservative when it comes to dealing with injuries this year than they have been in the past. And if the worst case scenario is they go into the playoffs with a 5 seed and not a first round bye, I mean, you're still in a pretty good spot. You know that you can beat anybody in the league because of what you've done this season, regardless of what the seeding is. So yeah, I don't think the coaching staff clearly would rather have Richard Sherman and some of their key guys for the entirety of the playoffs rather than go balls to the wall for a first round bye in the division. So I know fans probably don't necessarily want to hear that, but I think the 49ers would rather have their guys healthy for the playoffs in a wild card spot than really go all out pushing guys and risking injury for that first round bye.
Chris, kind of looking at the totality of everything that happened yesterday, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo said it. They didn't come out with really any fire in that first half. Just kind of little mistakes all over the field. Given what we talked about earlier about them coming off those 3 games that were just so tough, do you look at more of just kind of a blip on the radar, or is there really any reason to be concerned after what you saw yesterday?
I'm more inclined to think it was a blip on the radar. I think it was an emotional letdown. Like I said, George Kittle's comment about the team lacking intensity, I think, was pretty telling. The Falcons doing things that the 49ers hadn't seen from a schematic standpoint might cause them to be a little bit more alert in terms of their preparation for looks that maybe they haven't seen all season, and that might force them to have a little bit more of an edge, a little bit more focus during the week. It was an odd game. I think the 49ers might have tried to do too much to get George Kittle the ball. I mean, he had 17 targets, 13 catches. No other pass catcher had more than 2 catches. I think that's problematic and not indicative of what the 49ers offense has been all season, because typically they're pretty good at spreading the ball out. And look, if George Kittle doesn't fumble that ball out of bounds, or if Julio Jones is a couple inches short, we're talking about this game in an entirely different lens. We're saying, wow, the 49ers overcame a sloppy performance and still managed to win. They're in the driver's seat for the division. I mean, it is a game of inches. It's a terrible cliche, but the outcomes often determine, how we view teams, when really what actually happened in the game isn't all that different. So it's just, like I said, if Julio Jones isn't in short there, if Kittle holds onto the ball and gets that first down, then we're probably talking about this thing entirely differently. And when the sky isn't falling, as I guess it's the overreaction that we see and social media and Twitter and Instagram comments and all that stuff that we have to deal with.
49ers beat writer for the Sacramento Bee, Chris Biderman, joining us this morning. Chris, I want to go back to what you said about the receiving core. Emmanuel Sanders, Kendrick Bourne, and Deebo Samuel combined for just 4 catches yesterday. Was that more indicative to what the Falcons were doing scheme-wise on the defensive end, or was Jimmy Garoppolo just not finding his receivers and kind of, as you alluded to, was just more or less trying to force the ball to George Kittle?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. I haven't gone back and rewatched the game to really dive into what the issues were in terms of the passing game. It was just odd because there was no rhythm. After the Saints game, where the 49ers seemingly got a lot of favorable looks and were able to get Jimmy Garoppolo in constant rhythm throughout the game, it was just, there were very few plays where he dropped back and his read was right there. He was doing a lot of maneuvering around in the pocket. His initial looks weren't there. I thought the Falcons had a really good game plan just in terms of taking away some of Garoppolo's first looks. And Dan Quinn, obviously Kyle Shanahan's former boss, had a really good scheme going into the game, and the Falcons have been playing a lot better lately. But it probably wasn't the best game from the receivers. Deebo Samuel had that big drop. For whatever reason, Emmanuel Sanders, who was so good against the Saints, was mostly a non-factor in the passing game, and I think he was pretty frustrated about it yesterday. You could see at different times with his body language and things like that. But I don't think it's really a game worth panicking over. But I do think going forward, you're going to start seeing teams now really try to take away George Kittle and force the 49ers to adjust that way. And before yesterday, they were able to do that. But I do wonder if playing with 5 guys along the defensive front, which is what some teams did to the Rams last year. I know that's what the Patriots did in the Super Bowl, and the Rams run a similar system. If there's a blueprint out there, I think the Falcons might have done a little bit to curate that, and so we'll have to see going forward if other teams follow up and if the 49ers can readjust.
Chris, I'm seeing a lot of people on our text line asking a similar question. It felt like Kyle Shanahan was playing a little safe yesterday. They felt like the play calling was very much different, more conservative than what they've seen all year long. Did you see a difference in game plan, or is that just more credit to the Falcons than bad on Kyle's game plan?
Yeah, I mean, you didn't see the double reverse receiver pass.
Yeah,
you didn't see Kyle Juszczyk running a read option. So in terms of like gadget plays or gimmick plays, whatever you want to call them, there weren't really any of those. I thought really the most questionable play call that sticks out to my mind right now is the throwing a fade to George Kittle right before halftime on 3rd down. If the 49ers score a touchdown there just before halftime, I think the game looks dramatically different. And just throwing a fade that, we haven't seen Kittle make that type of catch before, and very rarely does it work, and Kyle Shanahan rarely dials it up. And so it was just one of those situations where maybe they were just trying to force feed Kittle a little bit too much. I think there are probably a lot of other plays that Kyle Shanahan has in his bag that could have scored a touchdown from there rather than, just throwing a fade to Kittle. And I don't know that Jimmy Garoppolo is necessarily the best fade thrower, and Kittle did good to make sure the pass wasn't intercepted, but it just didn't seem like a good play call, and maybe it was a little conservative, or just I don't know what it was, but just given the way the 49ers have been able to run the ball this year, given you have Jeff Wilson Jr. active, who has been a good goal line back. You have Raheem Mostert, who scored a bunch of touchdowns these last few games. I thought the 49ers not scoring a touchdown there at the end of the 3rd quarter was a pretty big point in that game, and I do wonder about that fade.
Chris, where can everybody read you and check you out online?
Sacramento Bee, sacbee.com/49ers. And then you can follow me on Twitter at Chris Biderman. My name is not spelled the way it sounds, so it's Biderman.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation for another day. But you can follow me there.
No, you know what? I know you've gotten this before, because anybody with anything like this gets this a ton of times. But anytime I hear your last name pronounced, you want to take a guess where I go?
Do you go Biderman?
No, I go.
Biderman?
No, I go. Wasn't it Deep Impact? That was the name of the asteroid, dude? that was discovered that destroyed America, or half of it was like something Biderman 49. You don't remember that?
I do not.
Wow. See, I figured the response would be dude.
I was more of an Armageddon guy.
I mean, they came out at like the same time. It was either Deep Impact with Morgan Freeman,
was more of an Armageddon guy.
I'm just saying. I figured people had said that to you before. Okay.
Quote of the day.
Yeah, no, I remember seeing Deep Impact, but I remember liking Armageddon a lot better.
Gotcha. You don't remember your last name being said associated with the asteroid of death and Deep Impact? See, I figured that'd be something that'd stick with you.
Maybe I'll have to cue that one up on one of these streaming services here.
He's more of an Armageddon guy. He's Chris Biderman of the Sacramento Bee. Check him out at sacbee.com, and we'll talk to him. Well, I don't know if he'll ever come on again, but I hope he does. Good stuff from him.
The Drive.